clause, employers include more extensive cooperation provisions that provide that each contractor must coordinate and cooperate with other contractors employed by the employer. Again, what they're doing here is shifting the risk onto the contractor. So the contractor cannot then claim that a reason for delay or a reason for additional costs, etc., is because they were prevented from doing their work by another contractor or by another project stakeholder. Once employers have amended the contract to place on them a responsibility to coordinate with these other contractors. Such provisions are becoming increasingly elaborate in placing the risk on the shoulders of the contractor to coordinate its work with other related contractors and other stakeholders on the project. In the case of contractors, typical amendments include one which we've talked about earlier, contractors wanting to delete the requirements in subclause 21 that notice of claims must be given not later than 28 days after the contractor becomes aware. Obviously, for contractors, this is a risk because it's effectively a time bar, and in the event that they miss this 28-day period, they are exposed to the risk of not being able to claim whatever it is that they want to claim for. Fitness for purpose. The Silver Book has requirements that the works, when completed, should be fit for the purposes for which they're intended, as defined in the contract. Now, such fitness for purpose obligation may not be covered by a contractor's professional indemnity insurance, and many contractors seek to avoid this obligation for fitness for purpose by deleting this reference in subclause 4.1, or at the least seeking to define exactly what is meant by fitness for purpose, because sometimes fitness for purpose can be a bit of a vague term, not really vague, but it's open to interpretation sometimes. So some contractors will seek to have more clarity by having this fitness for purpose term defined much more clearly in the contract. Other typical amendments that contractors make, clause 5.1 has an obligation of the contractor making it responsible for the accuracy of the employer's requirements, and that is a very onerous obligation. It means if the employer makes a mistake, the responsibility for that mistake is actually the contractor, who had nothing to do with producing the employer's requirements in the first place. So this can mean that the employer is not responsible for any error, inaccuracy, or omission in the employer's requirements, which he or his consultant may have drafted. The key to the acceptability of such a clause is usually the ability of the contractor to verify the employer's requirements during the tender stage. So if there's sufficient time and the contractor is able to verify the employer's requirements, obviously he's been given ample opportunity to ensure that there is no error and that it's accurate. However, if the tender period is short and there's not sufficient time to do so, contractors are often reluctant to take on this potentially unlimited obligation. And even where there is such time, contractors tend to push back on such an obligation. Liability. Towards the very top of the list of important issues for contractors in an EPC contract is the limitation of liability, which is covered under subclause 17.6. FIDIC's limitation of liability clause is often left intact, but contractors usually seek to limit their liability, and we talked about this earlier. So the default is 100% of the contract price, but depending on the factors, contractors tend to try to reduce liability sometimes to as low as 20% if possible, or if they can get away with it, to have no limit at all. If the employer can get away with it, that is. Leading contractors will rarely accept a contract, however, without the exclusion of all indirect and consequential losses that subclause 17.6 in its unamended form, its standard form, provides. The issue of intellectual property, which is covered by subclause 110, is another sort of contentious area, another area where contractors try to assert some sort of authority. Contractors are typically, as you would expect, they are protective over their intellectual property rights. However, subclause 110, employers' use of contractors' documents can be a negotiation battleground typically. Employers want a wide-ranging ability to use and recreate the contractor's intellectual property rights, and contractors seek to restrict this as much as possible to ensure that employers cannot, without paying or compensating them, reuse the intellectual property rights on future projects. So obviously, contractors try to prevent a situation whereby they design and construct a facility, a power plant, for example, and once that's done, the contractor then takes that design and goes to another project and reproduces that design, which has been developed by the contractor. So contractors tend to try to protect their intellectual property rights, but the standard wording in FIDIC as it is now actually gives the employer access to use the contractor's documents as they want. So the existing wording needs amendment if the contractor is to adequately protect its intellectual property rights. Alright, so the main features of the Silver Book. The Silver Book form of contracts typically contains enhanced testing procedures to demonstrate achievement of a specified end result, and that's a natural outcome of the nature of EPC contracts, where the contractor does all the work, designs, constructs, procures, etc., and has just the responsibility for handing over the completed facility to the employer at the end. The employer obviously wants some sort of certainty or guarantee that what's going to be handed over at the end actually meets the specified requirements. So there's very, very stringent and rigorous testing procedures that are incorporated into the Silver Book contract. As we've seen, the contractor carries majority of risks, but this has its own cost implications for the employer. The employer pays more. The final price and time tend to be more certain, this is what's preferred by the lenders in particular, who provide the money. Typically, you have a small number of tenderers with negotiation. The reason for this being that, first of all, the kind of projects that are undertaken with EPC contracts tend to be sort of highly specialized, but also because of the risk that the contractor bears there, the contractor obviously needs to be an experienced contractor that has the risk management tools to mitigate those risks for which it's liable. So you tend to have a smaller number of tenderers, and there tends to be an extensive negotiation so that the contractor is also able to negotiate terms that are favorable to it. The contractor is given freedom to use its own methods, but has to prove reliability and performance, which sort of goes back to the first point. So the Silver Book is not suitable if there's insufficient time or information before contract signature.